Well, good morning and welcome. Welcome to another celebration of our World Day for Consecrated Life. We gather today to celebrate this special day, again, as a virtual event, but I think it's one that keeps us safe during these days. We're not too secure yet in in-person gatherings, but they'll come. Trust me, we will come. But as I reflected back, even during the close down and the separated times for us in both dioceses of Brooklyn and Rockville Center, the last 2 years really have been filled with special events, days of prayer, meetings by way of Zoom and videos, all in recognition of the long history our sisters and brothers have woven into the fabric of today's two dioceses. It's been strange, but a very full time. And we look back and we say, we are indeed blessed. Today, as we gather to celebrate this special day, it's clear that we are far from finished. God calls us to fidelity to the mission, to one another, as we languish in limbo. And we'll hear more about that today with our theme. But I have to believe that the gospel still calls us. It still provokes us to respond, to serve, and to be present to the people of God in all the places and ministries we see around us, and most especially to one another. Our presence as consecrated women and men in the Diocese of Brooklyn and Rockville Center does make a difference. Can you imagine what the two dioceses would be today if we were not there over the years? How different it might be. But we are here, and we have been here. And we bring our histories, our talents, and our gifts, all of our different charisms, and our many cultures. In some ways, the whole world is in the church of the whole of Long Island and in its people. So we are truly blessed to have so many congregations from many places in the world to add to the beautiful fabric that we call church. We'll pray for each one of us today in our many congregations as consecrated, blessed, and committed women and men to the service of Jesus, who lives here among us in those we serve. So let us take our prayer sheet and we will begin with our prayer song.
A reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. But you are my witnesses, O Israel, says the Lord. You are my servant. You have been chosen to know me, believe in me, and understand that I alone am God. There is no other God. There never has been, and there never will be. I, yes, I am the Lord, and there is no other Savior. Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. It is nothing compared to what I am going to do, for I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. The wild animals in the fields will thank me, the jackals and owls too, for giving them water in the desert. Yes, I will make rivers in the dry wasteland, so my chosen people can be refreshed. I have made Israel for myself, and they will someday honor me before the whole world.
Giver of hope, we celebrate this day confident that you come to us in all circumstances and make all things work together for the fulfillment of your purposes. We bring you our needs and desires. Enlighten and encourage us who are committed to you in our lives of consecrated service. Response: let our lives reflect your calling and gracious love. Jesus, you teach us about the realm of God with wonderful and effective images. Inspire those who work to establish the future of our dioceses with the creativity they need to expand our minds and hearts. Oh God, you call us to unity through Jesus. Show yourself to those who may feel estranged. Bridge their differences with the fire of your love. Spirit of God, you take flesh in us and for us. Keep us open to the realities that challenge us now with a desire to respond. Oh God, you have blessed humankind with understanding, imagination, and memory. Show us how to learn from the past and to plan for the future.
It's my pleasure now to introduce Sister Mercedes McCann, better known as Sister Marcy to many, especially her Mercy family. Sister Mercedes currently serves in the position of leadership relations as a liaison for religious communities, particularly women's communities, for the St. John Vianney Center. In this position, Sister is available for consultation, education, and facilitation to leadership of women's communities. Furthermore, Sister is a psychotherapist in the outpatient department of St. John Vianney Center. In addition, she provided therapy services for the St. John Vianney Center residential program for 15 years, providing multidimensional psychotherapy for women and men religious and priests. Sister Marcy served as a formation minister for the Sisters of Mercy, as Assistant Superintendent for Special Education for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, as well as numerous positions within the field of special education. She also previously ministered in state and county institutions for the mentally ill. She has extensive experience facilitating small and large groups for religious communities, including chapters and assemblies, as well as speaking to groups of religious in the United States, Latin America, Europe, and the Pacific Rim on various topics concerning religious life, such as boundaries, change and transition, emotional development, and the spirituality of aging. Her particular interest is the intersection of spirituality, ministry, community, and good mental health in religious life. I think we need all of that, Marcy. Sister Marcy is a member of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. She holds a doctoral degree in clinical psychology from Seton Hall University, a master's degree in psychology from Marywood University. She's also completed religious studies with a concentration in sacred scripture from St. Charles Seminary. So with that kind of an introduction, Marcy, we are expecting wonderful things from you today, and I know you will deliver. So welcome to our two dioceses, and we are really so happy that you're able to be with us today. So I introduce you, Sister Marcy.
Thank you, Marianne. It's my pleasure to be with all of you this morning, especially since this has been a long time in coming. Marianne and I have been in conversation with each other for over 2 years now, so it's definitely been a long time in coming. So I chose for our presentation today, Languishing in Limbo, Feelings in a Post-Pandemic World. Now, strictly speaking, we're not in a post-pandemic world yet, but I'm one of these people who always lives in hope. So I'm going to look at it as if we were, and certainly it seems as if we're coming out of some of the horror, if you will, of the past 2 years, but we're not quite there yet. And then I'm going to look at how languishing, and I'll go into that in more detail, how that has affected our lives and what we can do to help ourselves get back on track if indeed it has affected our lives. So Corey Keyes, who is a sociologist and psychologist at Emory University, in 2002 did a lot of research on the term languishing in an article entitled "The Mental Health Continuum from Languishing to Flourishing in Life." Now, the word languishing was not one that was absent from our vocabulary at that time, but he kind of keyed in on it because he had done some research at Emory with students whom he found to be languishing as they made their way through the 4 or maybe 5 or maybe even 6 years of their studies at the university. So what he proposes is that all of us live on a continuum from languishing on the one hand to flourishing on the other hand. And at any given time, we could be in this languishing mode. I was thinking, I don't know what it was like weather-wise in your neck of the woods yesterday and the day before, but it was totally horrible here. I mean, it was gray, it was rainy, it was damp, it was everything you don't want it to be. And that kind of a day can cause us to languish. But then, like today here anyway, it's beautiful. So, you feel more like flourishing, and I certainly feel like flourishing with a group of you. So it's those languishing and flourishing and where we are on that continuum is really happens throughout our lifetimes. But what we're looking at now through COVID is languishing in a much more everyday experience. Now, Keyes has written extensively on this subject since his initial research. And based on that research, numerous psychologists have taken up the subject with relationship to the pandemic. Now, most of you, I think all of you, well, no, I guess most of you are New Yorkers, either on the island, in the city of Brooklyn, maybe in Manhattan, wherever you might be coming from. So I'm assuming, like myself, you read the New York Times. I'm addicted to it, although I have to confess I'm addicted to print, period. But I am addicted to it. We only get it on the weekends because it's so expensive, but I do love it. At any rate, in April of 2021, and then again in December of 2021, a psychologist, an organizational psychologist named Adam Grant, wrote an article. I believe that it was in the op-ed section, the review of the week section. There's a name for the blah you're feeling. It's called languishing. And that article has generated a tremendous amount of conversation around the term languishing. I know when I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, I can identify with this. I know what this guy's talking about. Other people apparently felt the same way, and there were letters and letters and letters to the editor about the article. And then I think he's gotten quite a career out of just that article. Grant brought the word to the forefront, and many people apparently are identifying with the feelings he described by that word. They've said, like myself, this is what I've been feeling. I just didn't know what to call it. So what is languishing and how has it affected our lives? Well, Keyes says that languishing is the opposite of flourishing. It's both the absence of mental health and it is both the absence of mental health and the absence of mental illness. So notice it's the absence of both. It's not good mental health to be languishing. It's also not at all mental illness. Languishing is not depression. It's not anxiety. It's its own scope, and you won't find it in the DSM-5. You won't find it in any psychological literature that's dealing with clinical issues, but it is something that we ordinarily can feel. Just because someone is not mentally ill does not mean that they are mentally healthy. So when we say it's not a mental illness, we don't mean that it's also not mental, that it is good mental health. It's not good mental health. And that's what we want to overcome when we talk about the languishing and moving on to flourishing. So what does it look like in our everyday lives? What would languishing look like maybe for yourself or for the folks with whom you live, or some of the people with whom you work? Well, languishing is feeling blah most of the time during the day. You just don't have a whole lot of spark. It holds you back from living the life that you would like to be living, the life you want to live. You feel empty. You don't have a whole lot of motivation. There's little enjoyment in your life. It's hard for you to focus on things. You might feel apathetic about what's going on around you, whether that's good or it's not good. You have enough energy to get your job done, but you aren't really enjoying doing it. And this would be especially true if it was something ordinarily you did enjoy. You might be having trouble concentrating over a period of time. You might feel aimless or stagnated or empty. You might feel like you're muddling through your day and looking at life through a foggy windshield. We had one of our sisters die about 10 days ago, and her funeral was this past Thursday. And she was someone who was greatly, greatly loved and very, very active in the community until this past summer. The sister sitting beside me at the funeral, people were gathering beforehand. So there was lots of, being a mostly Irish community, we do a lot of chatting before funerals. So we're sitting there and everybody's chatting with everybody else. And she turned to me and out of the blue, totally unsolicited by me, she said, I feel like I'm walking around in a fog. Bingo. That's languishing. And she happens to be somebody in leadership in the community, but just trying to get the everyday things done has become a drag. I guess that's the best way to put it. It's similar to burnout, but it's not burnout because burnout is pretty much restricted to the jobs that we do. And I'm using the word jobs, but obviously that's our ministry. And I think we can all identify with what burnout might feel like in our ministries. Life feels kind of overwhelming. How am I going to get through today? We're tired, but we're restless at the same time. We're not having interest in the things that used to interest us, that used to be exciting for us. We're just too tired to do them or feeling too numb. There's a sense of mental malaise, what the monks would call excedia. We feel like nothing really inspires us. There's no spark to get us going or to keep us going. We might have a general dissatisfaction with everything. As I said, this is not a clinical illness due to depression or anxiety. Keyes says that languishers are stuck somewhere in the middle of the mental health spectrum. They don't have a diagnosable mental illness, but they're not thriving either. And this feeling has become increasingly common since the pandemic. You may not be experiencing it, but you may have folks in your community who are or with whom you work. It's hard for people to describe the feeling. They just can't get the word. They don't know what word fits it. Our brains are wired to function at their best under short bursts of stress. Now, that's not necessarily stress in a negative sense. Like short bursts of stress might be getting ready to go on vacation or going to a family celebration or even going to a funeral, or it might be something really big and stressful. Our brains are wired to give us the impetus to do something. But when stress becomes chronic, the body and the emotions begin to break down and we become emotionally exhausted. And that's what has happened through the pandemic because the stress has become chronic. COVID has been chronic stress. We worry about illness, getting sick ourselves. There's a degree of uncertainty. Weddings, funerals, vacations, programs such as the program we're all engaged in right now, we worry about those things because how are we going to get them done? Are we going to get them done? In person and online, the grief that can't be processed normally. I'm sure most of you have probably engaged, at least in community funerals online, as we have. Well, then you can't process the grief normally. A sister said to me on Thursday, I have loved coming to the funerals because it's the only time I ever see the sisters. It's the only time we gather, and we've really only started to gather within the last maybe 8 months. Before that, everything was online. There's an isolation in working from home. You go from your desk to the kitchen, to the chapel, to your bedroom, and back to your desk again. You're not seeing the world around you. And there's an inability to connect with our loved ones. I'm sure many of you have had the experience of not being able to connect with family or friends. People have lost their ministries. Our older sisters can't volunteer in many of the ministries in which they previously volunteered because it's dangerous for their health. And so the ministry doesn't really want them to be there because they don't want them to catch COVID. And that's really hard for them. We can't plan for the future. Oddly enough, in the New York Times, I read the style section every Sunday. Actually, it's the first section I read, believe it or not. And I read all the wedding announcements. I don't know a soul who's getting married in New York. In the whole time I've been doing this, and it's actually since I was a child, because my dad was in the printing ink business, and we had every conceivable newspaper going in our house every Sunday. So I got hooked on the style section and would read about all the wedding announcements. And I'm intrigued with reading them right now because of the number of people who planned a wedding in the last 2 years and then had to replan it and replan it and replan it. And finally, they just went to the justice of the peace. They lost the impetus to keep on trying to plan and plan and replan. They lost the oomph to be able to do that. They just wanted to get married. I'll use myself for an example. This time last year, I should have been in Israel. So COVID really had already hit with a bang. So the program that I was going to through the University of Notre Dame had to be canceled. It was rescheduled for May. Well, in May, the Palestinians and the Israelis decided to get into each other's business, and it wasn't safe to be going to Israel. So the program got canceled again. It was rescheduled for September. In September, the country of Israel had an outburst of COVID again. So it got canceled. So now it is rescheduled to start on Valentine's Day. I do not have the same enthusiasm around it as I did a year and a half ago. I'm dragging my anchor, so to speak, to get started to pack. I just don't have the same enthusiasm. That's languishing. That's the up and down and up and down. And you don't, I think at some unconscious level, I'm afraid to get enthusiastic because it might get canceled again. I'm going to be like the Pope, or at least John Paul II, when he would go to a foreign land, he would get off the plane, go down the steps and kneel and kiss the ground. That's what I'm going to do in Tel Aviv, Tuesday a week. So that's what languishing can look like. And it's insidious. I really had to think myself, like, why don't I have that same enthusiasm? It's because I'm feeling some of that languishing. Along with the loss of loved ones in our communities and in our families due to COVID, we've also lost the sense of normalcy. We don't have what were our normal lives prior to COVID. And we're languishing in this abnormal situation, not knowing how to retrieve the normalcy. And I'm here to caution you, we will not go back to the normal that we knew. We may go back to a new normal, and that probably will be very good for us. But if you're yearning for the normal that you had before, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think it'll be a new normal of some description. So just when you think you're getting the normalcy back, something else rears its ugly head, the Delta variant, the Omicron variant, and who knows what else is coming down the road. Languishing is a state of not being at your best in the absence of an acute stressor. Now, you might be saying to me, oh, come on, Marcy, this COVID has been pretty acute. Well, it has in terms of sickness and death and so on, but it has gone on for so long that it's lost some of that edge, and it's no longer an acute stressor for us, but we're still languishing in the absence of that acute stressor. While nothing is really wrong, we've gotten used to what's going on at the present moment, nothing's really right either. Languishers, you might identify with this, find a way to while away the time because they're not fully invested in what's going on at the moment. They'll while away the time on social media. They'll be on their phones, they'll be on their iPads, they'll be on their computers. They can watch TV all day and all night when they get the opportunity. And these are people who would normally be out and about. They're counting the minutes till things are over, whether it's something they like to do or they didn't like to do, because lack of energy is one of the side effects of languishing. So those can be some of the indicators that somebody is languishing. I am languishing. If you were to say that to someone, it would be giving the feeling a name. So giving the feeling the name of languishing helps to normalize it. When someone asks you the question, how are you feeling? 9 times out of 10, most people say, oh, fine, no matter what's going on, oh, fine. And how many times have you asked the question and the person has said to you, oh, I'm fine? It's hard to know where to go from that. I'm fine. Oh, well, what does that mean? So it might help to say in the future, not to ask the question, how are you doing? Because the person's not going to be able to necessarily identify the feeling of I am languishing. You might want to say, so what have you done today? What have you been up to today? How did it go? And that will open the conversation. You might be surprised at how many people would answer with at least a definition of the word languishing. They may not use that word. They may not say to you, I am languishing, but now you've got the word in your vocabulary. So when somebody asks you, you can say, I am languishing. And you'd be surprised at how many people will say that back to you, will say, oh my gosh, me too, that's how I feel. It's how I felt the other day when the sister said to me, I feel like I'm walking around in a fog. Bingo, I know exactly what that feels like. So what are some of the symptoms that you might feel? A little bit different from the definition. What are some of the symptoms? Well, people who are languishing feel disconnected from those with whom they live or work. There's just a little bit of a disconnection. You know, I can't wait for this dinner to be over so that I can go upstairs and just sit in my chair and stare out a window. A disconnection. People might feel irritable. You know, there's an edge to the way they talk, or the way they answer your questions, or the way they relate to you. You might feel unable to generate any enthusiasm for events or projects. Back to the people who were planning weddings, where they were going to have 150 guests 2.5 years ago. Now they're happy to go to the Justice of the Peace and just get married. There's a lack of enthusiasm for continuing that project or that event. Having a hard time focusing on things or remembering to do things. I must check my calendar at least 5 times a day, because everything I'm doing is on Zoom, and all these Zooms they kind of just all melt into each other. And I'm afraid of forgetting something, of not remembering. I mean, last night I had to say to myself, now remember, when you get up this morning, you have to go down to the office and you're going to be with the people from Brooklyn and Rockville Center and from wherever else in the world you're tuning in from. So having a hard time focusing and remembering what you have to do. Being critical or cynical about things. Nothing anybody does is right. You might be hearing this from other community members, or you might hear it in criticism of leadership in your community. It's sort of like, okay, does anybody do anything right? That's a languishing feeling. Procrastinating about things, even things that ordinarily you like to do. I'm one of these people who loves to rearrange the furniture in the room periodically and switch up the pictures and do things like that. I don't have the energy to do that. Now, part of it is aging, I'm sure, but another part of it is, I think, a feeling of languishing. Oh, just leave it the way it is. It's working for everybody, so we'll just leave it that way. We're fortunate enough to have a wood burning fireplace here in the house. And I'm the person who usually likes to light the fire on a Sunday afternoon and just sit in there and enjoy it. I can't tell you how often I thought, I don't feel like it. I have to clean out the ashes afterwards. I'm not going to do it. That's languishing. Procrastinating about things even that I at one point enjoyed doing. Feeling blah, even though you're not sick. So just going through the motions. Having nothing to plan for, nothing to look forward to, or having planned for something and having it fall through or get interminably delayed. Let's just get it over with. I'm thinking of a community of sisters I know here in the Philadelphia area who were planning or have been in the midst of planning for building a new vacation spot on the Jersey coast. That, I think they must have put the shovel in the ground about 3 years ago. This pilings just went in the ground about 4 months ago. Because of the supply and demand, the supply being constrained along the way, not enough people to actually be doing the job, people not being there to be able to put cement in, do those kinds of things. This has been dragged out over 2.5 years. And there's a feeling in the community, oh, why can't they get this done? And those of you who are in leadership, you know who they are, even though the leadership team wasn't digging the holes and putting the pilings in. So nothing to plan for because things get interminably delayed. Engaging in risky or inflammatory behaviors to break the blah feeling. When I saw that in the research I was doing, I was taken back to January 6th, a year ago. And I wonder how many people got caught up in what was happening at the Capitol just because it was something exciting. It was something that stirred them up, that they were people who would not ordinarily have done that. And you read about people today who say, I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I got involved in that. So people who are languishing often will indulge in risky behavior or something inflammatory. Isolating yourself, just not having the energy to relate and go on with people. Abandoning good self-care. And then that oftentimes leads to low self-worth. Oh, well, I'm going to be working from home today, so I'm just going to wear my sweats. I'm not going to get dressed. After a while, that's not good, healthy behavior. Have I done it? Absolutely. From the waist down, oftentimes I'm not dressed up when I'm doing a presentation. Today I am. I want you to know that I am today, but sometimes I'm not. So abandoning, and then that's self-care. We act the way we dress, whether we believe that or not. And then finally, just missing work. We may not indulge in that ourselves, but we may work with people who do. And during COVID, there have been far more people calling in sick for work just because they didn't have the energy to get up and do it. They weren't sick, but they felt blah. So that's what languishing looks like. Now that's the end of the bad news for the morning. We'll go into the good news. How can we get rid of this? How can we work our way out of it? Well, as I said, languishers are disconnected from life. They may get the job done. I'm pretty sure most of you get the job done every day, but there isn't a whole lot of joy in it. Flourishers, and remember, that's the other end of the spectrum. Flourishers, on the other hand, are invested in life. They feel enthusiasm about what they do, and they actually are looking for new challenges and projects to take on. That's the brain, that's the dopamine in the brain kicking in and actually spurring us on. You know you are flourishing when you have energy for what you have to do, and you actually are enjoying the sense of accomplishment in getting it done. Now, remember, I didn't say you're enjoying doing it, because it might be paperwork, it might be something you don't ordinarily enjoy doing, but when you get it done, you feel really good about it. And it might be the paperwork. It might be at the end of the day being able to say, oh gosh, I got all the phone calls that had to be returned today finished. It might be a clear desk at the end of the day. That's an accomplishment. You say, gosh, I got all that work done. Years ago, when I was the assistant superintendent for special ed, I worked at the Archdiocesan office, and a priest was appointed the superintendent, I forget what the vicar for education, and he was sort of where the buck stopped. The poor man had no background in education whatsoever, did not want to do the job, pleaded with the cardinal at the time not to assign him to do it. He got the job. So one day I was in his office at the end of the day, and I said to him, gosh, I happened to drop in really just about at 5 o'clock. And I said to him, gosh, Monsignor, you must feel so good today. Your desk is absolutely clear. Tomorrow you can come in and feel good about starting all over again. And he started to laugh, and he said, you know how it gets clear? And I said, no, I guess you do the work. And he said, I just go like this with the papers into the wastebasket on the side of the desk. I could see people going, oh, that's what he did every day. He hated the job. And he was a wonderful, wonderful man, had been a wonderful pastor. He was in the wrong place, but he just, so just remember that if you don't get your desk cleared at the end of the day, there is a solution for it. So you become the agent of change in your own life when you're flourishing. And, you get things done, you accomplish things, even though there are peaks and valleys along the way. So how does one maintain, or if necessary, regain the state of flourishing? Well, I'm going to talk about a model called the PERMA, P-E-R-M-A model. And this model was developed by Martin Seligman, who is a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. And PERMA is an acronym that stands for P, positive emotions, E, engagement, R, relationships, M, meaning, and A, accomplishments. To achieve or maintain flourishing, one must work at each one of these components. When you are concentrating on positive emotions, engaging in your own life, relating to others by engaging in their lives, giving meaning to what you do, and finally, celebrating your accomplishments, you are leading a flourishing life. Now, we normally do this without thinking about it. This is really how most of us live most of the time. But that was then, and this is now. Now we have to be more intentional about it, because we can fall into a feeling of languishing. These things in the PERMA model do not have to be big deals. They don't have to be this huge accomplishment. But it does mean that we have to be mindful of even the small things that we're doing each day. So positive feelings, making a decision each day to find a silver lining in whatever the day brings, not allowing yourself to get negative and down about things. And then at the end of each day, assessing, well, how did I do that today? How did I manage to find the silver lining, or to keep positive? Practicing gratitude each day. At the end of the day, actively looking for, what am I grateful for that happened today? Engaging in what you are doing. In other words, being mindful of whatever the job is for the moment, for the morning, for the day. And no matter how insignificant it might be, making sure your bed is made, doing it with purpose and pride. You know, there's a book called Make Your Bed, and it's written by a military man. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but you can find it on Amazon. And he would tell the new recruits under him, make your bed every morning. If you do nothing else during the day, you accomplished something. You made your bed. So make the small, insignificant things that seem like nothing, but that's an accomplishment. Relationships, nourishing your relationships, reaching out to others in a purposeful way, noticing what's going on around you and noticing where somebody might be languishing and reaching out to them, or just making a phone call, taking a real interest in someone else's life, and being open to other people about your life and how you're feeling and what joy the day had brought to you. Meaning, appreciating the meaning in each event, or relating in the day, whatever the meaning that each of those events or relationships had brought to you. In our lives, we might be asking the question at the end of the day, where did God and I walk together? Where did we meet today? And what was the meaning of that meeting? And finally, accomplishments. As I said, these don't have to be big deals. It might be having that clear desk at the end of the day, keeping a list and checking off what you accomplished. I didn't used to be a list keeper, but since COVID, well, to keep myself on track, that's one reason why I've begun to do that. But the other reason I have found that the silver lining in it is I can look at it at the end of the day and say, oh, okay, I accomplished something today. I got something done. So keeping a list and checking it off as you do it. The more effort you put into these practices and the more mindful you are, the greater you will flourish. Have fun. Give yourself permission to take time out in the day to do something you really enjoy. Just one thing. It might be a phone call. It might be a humorous thing that happened that you want to share with somebody that gave you a good belly laugh. It might be watering the plants and deadheading them. You know, if you're somebody with a green thumb and you enjoy that, then taking 10 minutes or whatever it might take to water the plants or deadhead them. Be honest about your feelings. Putting up a good front is very draining, and it distances us from our own negative emotions. It's all right to feel negative. Acknowledge that. The trick is to acknowledge it and express it to somebody, and then to begin to move on and not to remain mired in it. So to flourish, you've got to be able to say, yep, I'm languishing. How am I going to get myself out of this? What am I going to do? How many times in a day are you asked, how are you? And your answer is, I'm fine, when you really are not. And how often do you ask the question and get a similar answer? This kind of general question makes it difficult to spot someone who is languishing or to identify it in ourselves. and it covers over the symptoms that you might be having. Languishers are fine. That's right. That's an honest answer. They're just not great. And so what we want to do is to get towards the other end of the continuum, toward the flourishing end, and to feel great. If we don't recognize the situation, we won't be able to improve on it. We rarely have conversations about our well-being with one another. So that would be a great thing to say, well, I woke up this morning and I wasn't really looking forward to the day, but this happened. And honestly, it was just a bright spot in the day. And I'm so grateful for it. So sharing some of those peak moments or small peak moments with one another is important. The problem is that languishing can degenerate into serious mental illness if it's not recognized. So that we want to avoid. That serious mental illness could be a PTSD disorder, it could be anxiety disorders, it could be depression. So we want not to fall into that ourselves, and we want to help one another not to stay in that languishing mode. Good self-care. Make sure you are eating healthily and getting enough rest and hydration. You deserve it, and it helps to maintain a healthy outlook on life. Take time to sit and enjoy a meal. Stop eating al desco, as I call it. In other words, don't pick up your lunch or dinner and take it back to your office. No al desco. It may be that it wouldn't be relaxing to eat in the dining room or cafeteria. You might be a sitting duck if you do that, but take your meal out to a porch or a living room or someplace where you can just be gazing out at beautiful scenery and relax. Somebody's got a thumbs up there. I think it's Sister Maria. No al desco. Enjoy what you're eating. Enjoy the fact that you're having a meal. And it's a big bonus if you can enjoy it with the people around you. Finding your flow, F-L-O-W, flow. That sounds like a term I pulled right out of the 60s. And in fact, it was a term back then, but it's really come to more prominence during this COVID pandemic. Flow occurs when you are so completely immersed in something that you lose your awareness of where you are, who you are with, or even the passage of time. Personally, I think this often happens when we go to the movies and get completely absorbed in the plot. Now, this wouldn't necessarily mean watching a movie at home, in your community room, and so on. But when you go to a movie theater, when indeed you can go back to a movie theater, where it's all dark around you, you really can get so absorbed in what's going on the screen, that you forget where you are. You forget about the passage of time, and you may not even be mindful of the people around you. That's flow. You get completely absorbed in something. It affords enjoyment, and at the same time provides a challenge to learn something new. If you're reading a really good book, that oftentimes can provide flow. Or if you're in an intense conversation with someone you really love, again, that can provide flow. When you are in flow, your brain releases dopamine, which can help with having greater enjoyment and feeling more energetic. So you want to be able to cultivate that feeling of flow. Flow differs from person to person. What might be flow for you might not be flow for me. Some people get into flow with jigsaw puzzles. That would make me so annoyed, I would not get into flow. However, a crossword puzzle would get me into flow. Although the New York Times one, that's beyond my pay grade. I hope before I die, I can complete it. But another crossword puzzle, I can get into flow, or a really good book. So it differs from person to person. You can't achieve flow, though, if your mind is elsewhere. So you need to set aside specific times to immerse yourself in it. No distractions, no emails, no texts, No social media, not watching the news, a specific time to be doing something you really enjoy, something you're really completely absorbed in. So that could be a puzzle, a crossword puzzle, a book, a game. You might be watching a good game on TV, sports, watching the Olympics now, you might get into flow, dancing, exercise. People talk about getting into the flow when they're out jogging. I can't say I've ever been there myself, but I hear people talk about it. All of those things contribute to flow, which is really healthy to get back into. Finding meaning in what you're doing. Choose your work wisely, at least some of the time. We don't have the luxury of not having some drudgery in our lives, the paperwork or whatever it might be. But if you don't have some meaningful work, you will soon begin to spiral down into languishing. Learn to say no, especially if you know that what the person's asking you to do is going to add to the drudgery in your life. When there are setbacks and things don't go as you had hoped or expected, give yourself a break. Go into a little bit of self-compassion. I think most of us are really very, very good at being compassionate to other people, but we don't necessarily give ourselves self-compassion. So if something doesn't go the way you had hoped it would, or if you weren't your best self in some instance, give yourself a little bit of self-compassion. Reframe those setbacks and see them as transitory and something from which you can learn. Be kind to yourself. Relate your experience to the shared human experience. We all have those kinds of setbacks. We are not all our best selves every single day. So that's just the human experience. So give yourself a little break there. It helps to remember that sometimes things happen and there is nothing wrong with me feeling, why did I do that? Or why did I act that way? We are at times very good at saying to somebody else, oh, don't worry about it. It's not a great big deal, but then we beat up on ourselves when it happens to us. So give yourself some self-compassion. If you feel there is nothing to look forward to, then you're probably languishing. So plan something small, but something that will give you some pleasure. Make sure it's something you want to do and a change from the daily routine. Just an afternoon away can be a big help. I know a friend of mine has been suffering with cancer, and she was going through chemotherapy, and she was having to isolate even more than the rest of us were isolating. So she would get in the car and just drive herself around a beautiful park area. Actually, it's a cemetery not far from us that has a beautiful park area as part of it. She would do that every day because it helped to get her out of the languishing of the chemotherapy and being by herself. That's a really, really good thing to have done and an important thing for us. Challenge yourself to try something new. Maybe start a hobby, go work out, go for a daily walk, but stick to the daily, read a good book, or join a virtual book club, something that is not work related. When you get really absorbed in something new, it helps ignite your passion. It gets that dopamine going. It ignites your passion in all the other areas of your life. So you move closer and closer to the flourishing. Make sure the challenges you set for yourself are doable. Don't set challenges you just can't do. Start small and meaningful and build on that. Small could be as little as cleaning out the bottom drawer in your bedroom. At the end, you've accomplished something. You know how you look at the junk drawer? Everybody, don't tell me you don't have a junk drawer. Everybody's got a junk drawer. If it's not in your bedroom, it's somewhere in your community living space. So we're always going to clean it out, and we never clean it out. Clean it out. You'd be surprised what you might find in there. And at the end, you will have accomplished something, and go celebrate it. Bring in some folks to see how beautiful the junk drawer looks now, because it's all in order. So I'm going to stop there and hope that some of this has resonated with you. You're probably wondering, well, how does this affect our mission? Well, I think that we think about our mission as what we do for all of the people out there, how we spread the mission to the world around us. And I think we don't necessarily pay attention to the fact that our mission is to the people with whom we live, the communities in which we live. And sometimes we forget that we have a mission to one another. So I think that languishing is appropriate to talk about in the sense of mission, because it's catching. If we're languishing, it can be catching to the people all around us. So we want to move away from the languishing into the flourishing, onto the flourishing end of the continuum, so that that flourishing happens in the communities in which we live, and then to the people to whom and for whom and with whom we minister. So that's where I see it connected to mission. Do you feel like your mission is flourishing? That's the question to ask yourself. So I am going to stop there, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on these two questions, and then we'll be breaking into small groups. Does any of this resonate with you? Have you felt this way? Have you ever felt this way in your life? If you haven't, I think you're dead. So you must have felt that way sometime in your life. And how has it affected you through this COVID period? When you break into the small groups, can you share that experience with one another? Can you share it with, can you first of all identify it in yourself? And then can you share it with some of the other people in the group? Just the way the sister at the funeral on Thursday spontaneously said to me, I feel like I'm walking around in a fog. So could you share that with some of the other folks? You'll be surprised at how many other people in your small group will say, me too, I have felt that way. And then how do you think you can best deal with it in the future so that you move along the continuum to the flourishing end of it?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sister Marcy. I don't know if you can hear us, but I think a lot of us are applauding you.
Oh, really? No, I can't hear that. But good,
You.
if that's the case, I won't languish after this presentation.
Oh, please don't, please don't. But I really think that you gave us words for the experience of what even just this COVID period has been, and maybe in other ways as some transition from ministry to, all of those things that happen to us as a life journey. Just naming the things that make us blah. I love that word blah. I don't like being blah, but the word itself expresses a feeling. You
Yes.
feel blah. So, and to look at all the different ways that are hidden in that we might just say, oh, I'll be better tomorrow. I'll be better tomorrow. But if we don't pay attention to it, we won't be better tomorrow.
Right.
So I think just highlighting all of the languishing, but also the flourishing, because I think we try very hard to overcome. I mean, as people of prayer and of relations with God, we know that this too shall pass and that we can move on, but sometimes we don't feel that's really going to happen. So I'm just very grateful for all the information, but the experience of listening to you and saying your own personal examples, but then it's like, oh, I didn't know that's what that was, so I'm just so delighted that you finally could make it and be with us, sure, and that the wait was well worth it. I mean, just so rich, and so we will break into small groups. And I'm reminding everyone that we're inviting you also, if you want to take about 3-5 minutes, grab a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and bring that back, or cold drink, so that we'll have like a coffee break. I can't go around with cookies today, sorry, but you might want to grab your own and bring it with you. And then in about 5 minutes, you will be placed into small groups. And we're going to put the 2 questions that Sister Marcy gave us up on the chat. So if you open that screen, you'll see the questions. And then we'll talk about that for a few minutes, 20 minutes really. Then come back and then have some conversation with Sister Marcy before we end. Okay? So go grab your coffee, come back in a few minutes, and we'll go into our small groups. Okay, I think most of us are back. We're still in process here. So we have a little bit of time now to interact with Sister Marcy. You know, a little reflection on what came up in your group, or if you have a comment or question you'd like to direct to her. Since there's so many of us, we can't see everyone on one screen. So I ask you to put your questions or your comments or whatever into the chat room.
Yeah, in fact, everything Sister said actually resonates with me. And, you know, especially when she mentioned sometimes you don't have words to express the way you're feeling, but you know you are within that continuum. You are not on the high mode and you're not on the low mode, but something is just going on, you know? So it resonates with me some days. And one good thing with what she said, she kind of makes us acknowledge something is going on. Name it, name the devil, and the devil will quit. So when you name it, then you seek solution. Then that takes me to, okay, how do I handle it? And I was telling my group that sometimes I have a CD, African CD music, and when I put it on, and I start dancing. And as soon as I start dancing and singing with them, I'm uplifted. Even when I shut the TV, the video off, and I'm out somewhere else, the music is still going on in my head, and I still see myself dancing and, you know, smiling. So I just said to myself, like what she said, find time sometimes to do what you love to do because it lifts you up. And
that's a good example of flow. You get so absorbed in the music and the dancing, and it takes you, first of all, you get absorbed in the dancing, but it takes you to another place with other people. That's an example of flow. So you're using flow perfectly.
Yes, yes. And one other thing, sister, you said that makes tremendous meaning is the fact that we are sometimes absorbed with our ministry. We are anxious to get out to do that, to get out to the school where we are teaching, or get out to the office where we are working on the hospital. And we forget our first ministry with the sisters we are living with. Because sometimes there's a sister who told you last night, oh, yesterday I was feeling so bad, and in our rush and anxiety to get out, to do something for others, we forget this primary responsibility. Check up on that sister. I think it's primary. You mentioned it, and I think it's very good, and it's primary for us. The people right there with you before we start moving out to the people out there, because charity will always begin with us at home before it goes out. So that's a very good reminder, and I thank you for bringing that out.
Naming the elephant in the middle of the room. We are not good at that in various circles. We talk around it until we're dead and never really address it. But you named it, you identified it, you named it, And it's a common experience. We're all going through this common experience. But I thank you for naming it and the various names that you have given it, and the feelings and what we're all going through. So you saved each and every one of us a lot of money from therapy.
Oh, Brother Gabriel, I'm supposed to be getting business here.
Some dollars.
Thank you, the brothers, thank you.
Could you speak a little bit to the sense of the growth on the continuum from languishing to flourishing, and that middle part where there's deepening and growing and pain to go through that transformation to flourishing?
Well, sometimes I think, Peggy, I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes I think we get so used to wherever we are on that continuum, we get comfortable with it, even though it's languishing. I mean, we can, I'm sure you've met people that they're not happy unless they have something to worry about. They're not happy unless they share all those worries with everybody else. They're not happy unless they're complaining. So people get used to where they are on the continuum. And that's why I said it really takes some mindfulness to begin to move the needle a little bit towards a more flourishing way. So it really is that being, first of all, identifying and naming wherever you are, whatever the feeling is right now, and then where would you like to be? And if you don't want to be in the flourishing end, well, that's not a good sign. If you're happy being, stuck, that's really not a good sign at all. So that's really what can lead to mental illness. Really a diagnosable mental illness. If somebody's stuck and just wants to stay stuck, they don't, and I don't mean that they get up in the morning and say, I want to stay stuck. They don't know how to move the needle, and they're not being mindful about moving the needle when once presented with some things. Well, why don't you try this? Or why don't you try, why don't you clean out your bottom drawer? Or why don't you make your bed? Things like that, small things. So sometimes we can get stuck in negative feelings, and they just generate and generate and generate. I'm sure you've seen that, in community life. I certainly have. So it does take that moving out of there. And I think and this takes a lot of gumption on anybody's part in the community. Sometimes we want to foist it off on leadership, but it's really, somebody said earlier, community life is all of our responsibilities. So even being able to say to somebody, you just seem unhappy. What do you think is going on in your life? And then giving them specific examples. Do you realize that, you're always negative no matter what? Just giving a specific example takes a lot of gumption. And one of the things that I did not mention this, because this is a whole other talk, but one of the things that can happen when people get stuck there is they get into addictions. They might get into alcohol, they might get into drugs, might get into gambling, addicted to TV. Somebody who stays in his or her room all day long watching TV, that, just, they don't want to relate to anybody else because they're stuck in this place. So caring enough to be able to say to somebody, you know what, you just don't seem like you're happy right now. What's going on in your life? So helping them to name it.
All the people in our group mentioned very clearly that you did a very clear presentation and gave us things that are very practical to implement in the lives. That, it's good, it's a freeing experience to be able to name something.
Yes. Yeah.
And to label it, and then that way you can move forward on it. And many of the people mentioned the challenges that they went through in terms of having to personally go through different changes in their own lives, which sometimes is very difficult for people to do, especially at different ages. But the support that they received, one of our members had fallen and broken her arm. And suddenly she saw the beauty of the people coming to her and helping her. And it opened up a whole new world of seeing the beauty in her life. So, and the thing one person mentioned the most, and I think you mentioned it the most, is to be mindful about what you're doing. That that's the key to changing, making changes. That you can, if you can do these things, if you're mindful, because being mindful opens up the silver lining of the mundane, the things that you're always constantly doing. For instance, someone who exercised and suddenly they realized they couldn't go to the gym, but they went to the park, or, you know, they met different people. It changed their whole life for the better. And the last part of that is that we look to the blessings as religious people, as people, spiritual people, and believing in God, that when we look at life in a very positive way, knowing that God is walking with us, and there is always a silver lining, there is always that positive thing in our life. If we continue to really look at that and implement it on a daily basis, like you said, in the beginning of the day, you look at the things that we always ask for God to help us. At the end of the day, we look at all the blessings that He's given to us, but also the blessings that we impart to other people.
Exactly.
But thank you so much. You're excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sister Mercedes, for the wonderful presentation, which we appreciated so much in our group. And I thank you especially for the way you mentioned about not asking open-ended questions, because most of us utilize that method in our work, but never realize that it's also good to have it as everyday culture in the community, because most of the time you see your sister, you say, how are you? Fine. That doesn't open up a whole way of conversation. So I really appreciate that you made us realize that we can ask questions in a way that we open up conversation, and we can open up ourselves to ourselves in the community when we ask questions like, oh, sister, you're not looking, tell me how your day went today. That will not bring fine into the conversation. That will bring another conversation that we make the sister to come from. Thank you so much, and we appreciate
You're welcome. You're very welcome.
And so we pray. Eternal and loving God, trusting in your faithful love, I renew my vows to live following Jesus Christ in chastity, poverty, and obedience. I commit myself anew to serve the Church in the ministries entrusted to my religious community or institute. Grant me the grace, Lord Jesus, through the intercession of Our
Lady, and the prayers
and support of my sisters and brothers in Christ, to live these vows faithfully. Amen.
Loving God, we want to face the future, for the past is over and gone. We live with memories we have learned from our experiences. Help us let go of that which holds us and live in the hope of God, in the way of God. Help us to be strong together. You have seen us through good times and bad, and we believe that you, O God, will bless our futures as you have held our past. Be with us as we move together in hope and trust. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank yous to all who helped to make today possible. Sister Maria, whose voice we just heard, and her cohorts, Alexandra, who was also helping with all the IT work behind us. Of course, Sister Marcy, whom we've thanked and I could keep thanking. I want to thank the Council for Religious for helping to plan today and to move it forward for us, and to all of you. We can plan something, and if nobody shows up, well, it's no fun. So we're just delighted that so many of you were able to participate today. All right, so God bless. Enjoy the rest of this weekend, and we'll finish with our closing song prayer.